Hello. Now, those of you that follow my social media profiles may have noticed that a couple of weeks ago, I went to Alabama to hang out with my guest for today's interview, Larry Alex Taunton. He described himself to me as a low church troublemaker yesterday, but he's actually a debater, a thinker, a writer. He wrote a wonderful book called The Grace Effect, which he gave to me when I was there, and I read, and it was a fascinating, beautiful story about adopting a 10-year-old girl from a Ukrainian orphanage, and who had all sorts of struggles, and how she's come into their lives. And he basically takes in waifs and strays like me in between writing books and articles for The Federalist, slightly having a pop at Jordan Peterson or not, depending on which way you look at it. And is just an all-round wonderful human being. He's come to London. He's just got back from Geneva, and he is here in the bunker that is the Reclaim the Media studio. Larry, how are you?
I'm doing very well, and I must say that it is an honor to be sitting in your spot for the Fox and Father show.
The Fox and Father spot. Yeah, I think it's better if we swap it round. Calvin looks better in this chair because it makes him look more serious.
Look, okay, we need to give you a collar.
We do.
There.
We do need a collar. So there's millions of things to talk about, but the first I want to start off by talking about Trump, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
What has been the reaction to the verdict on the Bragg case against him in the US?
It's been incredible. I was abroad when that happened, but I've been following it like almost everybody on social media and talking to my friends there, various contacts. There's one side of the whole controversy that says that the left has gone too far, and the result is the fact that Trump has raised north of $50 million.
I think he said $100.
Is it already at $100 million? So he's raising all kinds of money on the backside of this. The left has achieved something I never thought possible, and that was to make Donald Trump look like a victim. I mean, a genuine victim. They've managed to do that. I think the left, maybe they're even thinking they've gone too far, because I'm not seeing the victory laps that I thought that I would see. I mean, we all knew this verdict was coming. I mean, from the moment the trial began. But I'm sensing that they think maybe they've gone too far. I mean, what's your perception of it all?
My perception of it is that they were going to get him. He can't ever be president again. Yeah, they will not let him be president, because I think he's so protective of America, isn't he, as a person? Yeah. But if they let him get anywhere near the White House again, then I do have a feeling that Joe Biden, his brother, his sister, his son, may all end up in jail, because they are actually crooks. To me, the Bidens seem like a mafia family. I don't know what the exact wage in Congress is, but in the Senate is, but it's not enough to sustain the lifestyle that Sleepy Joe has had for all these years. So he seems to be like one of the most profoundly corrupt, racist politicians I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think Democrats have pushed all their chips to the center of the table and have wagered everything on the outcome of this election. And that means that they will do everything they can to steal it. They're also creating, I believe, an atmosphere of assassination. I don't think they'll go so far as to do that, but I think that they will create the atmosphere so that if someone makes an attempt or in fact does achieve such a thing, they'll go, well, we're horrified. We just never saw something like this coming. But in labeling him a Nazi, a fascist, it'll be the end of democracy as we know it. It'll be the end of America, the republic, you name it. They're creating that sort of atmosphere. They want him dead.
They do, and it's this, I get very worried. I also feel stupid that I haven't started the interview by saying, can you tell everyone a bit about yourself? So I'm an idiot, but we're going to find out about Larry as we go through the interview, so don't worry about it. I think that's what they've done. You were saying the left, and they say this thing about our democracy, which basically means our totalitarian state that you have to obey. Is it the left, or is it good and evil?
Well, it's both. Typically, when I'm saying the left, I'm really referring to the global left. And when I'm talking about Democrats, I'm referring to explicitly the United States. But yeah, no, I think it is a battle of good and evil. We talked a little bit about that yesterday at lunch, but I think that there are many. Listen, I was just in Geneva. I was at this kind of anti-World Health Organization gathering of policy wonks, politicians, and others. Hardly anybody is aware of what's happening. The World Health Organization has a proposed treaty, a kind of a pandemic treaty, where the signatories, in some sense, it's designed to break down national sovereignty. It gives the World Health Organization extraordinary power in any country that signs onto this treaty. And what I thought was very interesting, as with most, conferences, it isn't always the presentations that are so interesting. It's the conversations that are taking place in the hotel lobbies and in the restaurants and the coffee shops. And what I kept hearing in all these different conversations was people, kind of thinking aloud, what is this evil that we're seeing? Who are these people? Why are they trying to achieve these kinds of things? This extraordinary evil that we're seeing happening, in our throughout the Western world. And there are those who arrive, I think, at the right, answer to it, that it is genuinely evil. A spiritual battle. And then there are others who still haven't quite gotten there. They're thinking, maybe we can oppose this through, just through elections and through, proper policy proposals. But I think it's much bigger than that. I think this is a spiritual battle. And until you really understand that, I don't think you're seeing the big picture of what's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting that the British particularly fought so hard for Brexit, which was, supposed sovereignty and control of our borders, none of which we got. But when it comes to the health of a human being, they will hand over their own individual sovereignty.
Yes.
Rather than their national sovereignty. I find that very weird. And that means that people do not get it. They must not get it. They must think that their life, their actual living, breathing body belongs to the world.
Yeah.
Which it does in a way, I suppose. It does. But it astonishes me that there was so much noise made about Brexit and it dominated people for years and years and years and years and years. And yet this, which is a much bigger hand giveaway, because the WHO essentially going to have the power to introduce climate lockdowns and various things, that people just seem either unaware or apathetic or bored, or they just think if they bury their head in the sand, it'll go away. But it's the most egregious attack on the human being and the family and your right to make decisions for your own life that I've ever seen brought forward as an idea for legislation, and global legislation as well. So one world government, pure communist centralization, dreadful, terrifying stuff.
And they know that stuff doesn't sell. They know that Marxism doesn't sell. Communism doesn't sell. Globalism itself doesn't sell. One world government doesn't sell. Fear sells. So they've learned that that's the way that you can achieve almost anything if you can create an atmosphere of fear. So, what they're doing, it's an old tried Marxist playbook, or should I say maybe, also a fascist playbook. And that is where you create fear, you create the problem, and then you present yourself as the solution to the problem that you've created. And this is what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's sort of going through almost Trump has said that he will not sign on to it. America won't be a signatory if he gets back in. I don't know what Biden's position on it is. I imagine it is probably to sign it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I
think they're driving it.
It's part of a broader movement, isn't it, across all aspects of our lives to take control. My mother used to just say, the only thing she always used to say was, it's all about power and control. It has nothing to do with anything else. And this thought came to me yesterday when I was driving into London to see you. And I drove past the playground. And there was these kids. One of them was obviously bullying another kid. And they were sort of gathering around. And the guy was and it was not nice. And I saw the teacher come over. And I thought, that's life. That bully in that, trying to impose their will over other people, we just got a complicated systemic version of that in life. Grown-ups are no different.
You made that point at lunch yesterday, and I thought it was an excellent point that the playground bullies are now, at the UN. They're now ensconced in London and in The Hague and in DC. It's the same program, just via more sophisticated means.
So let's just take us back a bit into your life. So tell us where you were born and brought up. Tell us a bit about your mum and dad. I've heard a bit about your mum and dad. And tell us what you do, what motivates you. I know about your podcast and your writing, but just tell us a bit about Larry Taunton.
I was born a poor black child. Do people get that reference anymore? Steve Martin, the jerk. A very funny movie and a funny line in that movie. I was raised, I guess, it's very interesting. I always say grits and crumpets. As maybe the colonists are more British than the British.
Yeah.
And my mother's a Canadian from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And they had, so my grandparents had pictures of the Queen on the wall and high tea and, this kind of thing. And then my father is, to use the colloquial, from L.A., that's Lower Alabama.
Right.
And career soldier, special forces, met my mom while on leave. And of course, we moved all over the United States. My brother was born in Germany, but I came along after that. And so just about every place with the prefix Fort seems like I lived there. I was born at Fort Benning, lived at Fort Campbell, Fort Lewis, Fort Gordon, all over, but very Southern, I suppose. But always mindful of the fact there was a much broader world, because I would spend my summers on Vancouver Island, and my mother was always reminding me, that there's more than just the United States. And I always, very patriotic. I think that's you can't, at least I don't know about now, but in the era in which I grew up in the military, there's a certain ethos that you inhaled through that. Duty, honor, courage, these things are emphasized. It's been attributed to Orwell, but I don't think he actually said it. But whoever said it, it's brilliant that rough men stand ready to do violence on behalf of those of us who sleep peaceably in bed at night. And I grew up in the company of rough men who are ready to do violence on behalf of a free people. And you absorb that. You learn to appreciate that culture, that ethic. And I guess in some sense, I often joke that my father killed Marxists for a living. I suppose I can fight them on Twitter.
Yeah.
So stand against those things. But I grew up loving my country, and while at the same time appreciating other countries and other cultures. And I love people who are patriotic about their own. I love the fact that you love your country.
Yeah.
I love, Italians who, I love Giorgia Meloni because she's, what was it that she said that got her elected? I'm a woman, I'm a Christian, I'm an Italian. I mean, I just love that. I'm not Italian, but that resonated with me, that she's
a somewhere person, as Scruton would call them, not an anywhere person, which is why we've got all the woke flags. The military thing is interesting because I think I was either reading or listening the other day that it's 1% of the American population is involved in the military, which means that about 3% of the American population even have any engagement with the military. But these kids and young men and their families, they tend to be blue collar families, working class to lower middle class families, often white families, which is changing. And the American military recruitment is going through an absolute crisis phase,
cratering
at the moment, because the people who came back in body bags from Iraq and Afghanistan were overrepresented by the demographic by 75% or something. And these people are being told, the people that are being asked to do what you said, to kill men so that others may sleep peaceably in their beds, they're being told they're the problem. And by men that have never seen conflict. I mean, has Milley seen conflict? What's his contribution to the American military, to saving lives?
Well, I remember a very, somewhat iconic Army commercial from my youth, and it would begin with helicopters and guys rappelling out of helicopters, and all these scenes of battle and so forth, and then it ends with the sun coming up and a couple of guys, after they parachute and land on the ground, they're having a cup of coffee, and it says, "The Army, we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day." Now, think of that as a recruiting slogan. And yet it was highly successful in my era. And it's gone from that to being all about you and rainbow flags and these kinds of things. And they're discovering that recruiting is cratering, that young men don't want that. The assumption was in a previous era that young men, they reach a place, you remember it in your teen years where you feel the strength of youth, the physical strength of youth coming upon you, and you want to test yourself. Maybe you do that through sports, or maybe you do it through, rock climbing or hiking or whatever. But the military was kind of a rite of passage. That's interesting to me that you say there's only 1%, because I would have assumed the number was much higher. And, my wife and I, Lori, who you've met, we've taken to watching, a lot of these old TV shows and movies and so forth, in part because you're not going to be surprised with something that, really offends you. And what has really struck us is these ones that we watch from, say, the 60s or 70s or even into the 80s, is that military personnel are throughout, like military families, and it entered into, the Vietnam era and so forth, and the Cold War, that was a part of popular culture. Now it's something that's kind of hidden away from view, and I would say the average citizen knows almost nothing about that world and that kind of life, and hence they know very little of the actual sacrifice that's involved. I was thinking about these are the kind of things I occasionally do think about, but Pericles, in his funeral oration, the famed funeral oration after the first year of the Peloponnesian War, and Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, a very famous classic work. But he says this, he says, happiness depends on freedom, and freedom depends on courage. Well, Abraham Lincoln was very familiar with that funeral oration and that line, and he used that in writing the Gettysburg Address. And thus he went like Pericles, he went to the battlefield, to Gettysburg itself, where so much blood had been spilt. And thus he says, that this is the cost of freedom. Blood is the currency of freedom. And I think we've lost all that. And so now we have a privileged generation. And in the United States, something that is a little foreign to you here in Britain, and to certainly people on the continent as well, is that most Americans, 69% of Americans, have never been outside of the country. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to understand if you're
not if you've been there.
Yeah. If you've been there, you understand. But Britain would fit inside my home state of Alabama. And the idea, say, for instance, of my father or my father-in-law taking a family of four to Europe is just, it was, a man with a middle income, he's not going to be able to do that. He's not going to have the time off to do that. So the result is you take a fishing trip to Canada, or maybe he's been drunk in Tijuana, or maybe his honeymoon was in the Caribbean, but that's it. And so now you have a generation that is being told that America is awful, it's racist, it's backward, it needs to get in line with the rest of the world. And you have a generation that's coming up that's going, oh, wow, it didn't know this. Maybe we need to burn down our institutions. And that's what's happening, because they're so ignorant of their own history, and they're so unaware of the sacrifices that were made to achieve what we have in the United States.
Do you think there's an element of a secular element to this, which is that people see suffering, they witness suffering, and they go, we must stop this. This must never happen again. And then people get affluent and leisured, and then they forget about it. And then they get curious about suffering again. And because what I sense in a lot of people nowadays, in the destruction of the West, or the suicide of the West, however one wants to look at it, is that there's a real curiosity in suffering. So certainly in the pushing of the taboos, the sexual taboos around children and stuff like that, which is demonic and satanic as far as I'm concerned, but there's a curiosity in it. There's, within a portion of the population, there's like, yeah, I kind of want to, I wonder what looking at someone massacred looks like. I wonder what a mass grave would look like. Maybe that's interesting. Maybe we do need to cleanse out again and turn ourselves back into beasts. Do you think there's a sort of an inevitability to that? To that cycle, that the more free, the more rich, the more opportunities. Young American people, a lot of young American people will have opportunities that their parents never dreamed of having. And the opportunities I've had in my life, my parents never dreamed of having. So is there just a feeling that it's about time again? We need to see a war. We need to have something to really worry about, to stop us worrying about this rubbish.
That's interesting. I'm mindful of what I recall one author saying, nations are born stoic and die Epicurean. There's so much truth in that. But I'm also mindful of something. My eldest son, Michael, who I think you met him. You did. We had lunch with him. Michael said this.
He spilt a Coke all over your jacket.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He had all over the table. He sure did. I should send him the dry cleaning bill for that. But Michael made this comment to me a couple of years ago that I thought was spot on. He said, Dad, your generation grew up revering the World War II generation. They were your heroes. He said, we were taught that it was the civil rights era, that generation. They were to be our heroes. And now our generation wants their own civil rights movement. They want something, they want their own struggle. And in the absence of one, they've created a false one, or they're allowing it to be created around them, where what we're seeing now is, an effort to create crisis in society. And you have a lot of young people who are jumping on board with that because they see it as part of their struggle to save the planet, or they're going to save nature, or they're going to, whatever the cause, they're ready to go into the street and march for it. And what I find also interesting about that is when you try to drill down into that, into conversation with them, if you were to stop somebody in one of these London streets, as I have, when I've been here, when there are various marches going on, and asking them what it is that they're marching for, that after the first line or two that they've taken off of a banner, there's not much there. They don't actually know. They just know it's a cause. It's some kind of social justice. It rings true with them, and it's more feeling than actual thought.
Yeah, it kind of has it's like an inversion well, not an inversion. It's analogous to when you're wrong about something, you're very vehement about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In an argument. And it's that sort of thing. It's very shallow. They don't understand what they're talking about. I've got some friends and lost some friends just telling them things. And they said, that's not true. And I said, look it up. And then they look it up, and I show them fact after fact after fact. They're like, 10,000 unarmed black men are killed in America every year. I'm like, no, they're not. They're not. 19 on average are killed. That's a 1 in 10 million chance when you leave your house of being killed by a cop. And it's similar with white men as well. So there is no actual police discrimination on unarmed black men. There are more stops on unarmed black men in traffic stops and various things like that. But these things are cultural, and they're based around the area and the crime rate within areas, and then you get into a much bigger conversation. But it is all based, this fake civil rights movement, which is turning now into a very, very, very dangerous secular religion, has no substance to it at all. No, it's got no intellectual foundations. There's nothing good. There's nothing that anyone can say that you couldn't destroy their argument in. Well, not destroy, but just correct their argument.
Yeah.
Within a second.
But don't you find that it's very difficult to have that conversation because they've been conditioned to react? They've been conditioned to shut you down. There was a time when, speaking on a college campus or something, students would line up to take you on. Maybe they weren't the best arguments, but at least they were prepared to make them, and they would defend your right to make an argument. But now they don't even want you to speak. They want to prevent you from speaking. I had a unnerving experience a couple of years ago where I was speaking at a college, and a professor stood up in the back and said, "This lecture is over. This lecture is over." He said that I was not allowed to continue speaking. And it's because I'd mentioned the sacred cow of the American left, abortion. And he started carrying on about black people being lynched in America was a much bigger problem. And it just so happened that I had just been doing research on this, and I said the last lynching that took place in America took place in my home state, Mobile, Alabama, in 1981. And I said, that guy went to the electric chair. You know, the guy who did that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. As I said to him, is there really a problem? I mean, please tell me who these people are who are being lynched. Of course, he couldn't tell me because it was fabricated. But I wasn't to be allowed to speak any further when I'm talking about the millions of children who are being annihilated in the womb.
Which is I'm baffled. I can sort of see. I heard what Trump had to say about it, and I think he adopts a position that most people will take because they just don't want to deal with the problem. But what I found really depressing was England last year, Great Britain even, was a 13% rise in abortions last year to over 200,000. So people start saying, you know, we need to stop immigration. We've got to assimilate with our new friends from different countries. And I'm like, well, we're killing 200,000 of our own every single year. But if you talk about it, you are the evil person, which I find really odd. Which is, hang on, I thought the baby killer was the evil person. Yeah. And in actual fact, I think the doctor who does the baby killing would go further up my list than the mother in a way. But it's astonishing that this is the sacred cow of the left. In the same way as Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't know whether you saw it this morning, when they turned around and the reporter said to her, "You worship Trump and he's a convicted felon." And she went, "I worship God and you worship George
Floyd, yeah. So I've met her. I met her at Mar-a-Lago. She's a very interesting woman, and she is exactly what you see there. That's not an act with her. I mean, she's very passionate about what she believes. But this kind of comes back to where we started this conversation, because abortion is, for the left, it is their ritual. It is a sacrament, and it is because they know that a broadly Judeo-Christian culture, that the sanctity of life is what we hold very dear. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, we're going to take your children and we're going to destroy them, and we're going to celebrate killing them. I mean, there's a website called Shout Your Abortion where you take a little video and you upload yourself celebrating your abortion. You see these T-shirts that say, "I've had an abortion." You know, it's not just simply that they want to make it available. They want you to celebrate it. They want you to call good evil and evil good. And it is meant to be an in your face. I mean, did you see the Project Veritas videos of a couple of years ago?
Yeah, where they're selling the
baby parts. Yeah, they're selling them.
I know why it is, because they have no meaning, and they have no faith. So in anger and rage at God, they destroy His creation to prove He doesn't exist. That's what they're doing. That's surely the reason why people would celebrate an abortion. I bet you there's a whole lot of abortions that take place in shame and sadness and hidden away, but the idea of celebrating it is an idea of turning around and going, it's very similar to me to, you know, Aztec culture, and, you know, it hasn't rained for 3 weeks, so let's get 40,000 of our enemies and chop their hearts out and throw them down some stairs on this temple we built. Do you know what I mean? It's really, it's unreformed and really, really, really dangerous, but it seems to have accelerated so much recently that I'm wondering, as you said about the Trump thing, without there hasn't been the kind of massive round of applause from everybody, whether if it is a war in good versus evil, whether they've noticed that we're overreaching, we might be overreaching here, that the part of America is just, I mean, Trump bumped 6 points in the polls, in those snap polls, and we'll see how it happens, but this sudden, oh God, we're making it worse for ourselves. And they're painting themselves into a corner that they can't get out of without violence, maybe. I don't know.
Except for this. Whenever you see politicians treat their constituents with utter contempt, which we're seeing in the United States, which we're seeing in Europe, we're seeing in South America, this this phenomenon isn't unique to Britain. It is unique to America. I'm seeing it. I mean, since the pandemic began, I've probably been in, 15 or 20 countries, and you're seeing it in all of them. The same tactics, the same kinds of policies that are coming out of places like Davos, for instance, that are pushing this globalist agenda. But when you see politicians treating their constituents with contempt, to me it signals either A, they're retiring, they can't run again because maybe they've reached term limits, or the fix is in and they know it. And I think that the fix is in, and they know it. They are working at perfecting what they did in 2020 with all the ballot harvesting. They're doing everything they can in our country to give votes to people who aren't even citizens of the United States. That's taking place all over the United States, particularly it's in targeted swing states. Typically in blue cities. It might be in a red state, but it might be a blue city where they're targeting specific districts where they will rig the outcome of the election. So to me, they're doing this because they feel confident we can do this. We can treat Americans like this. And because in the end, we're going to win anyway. Not really, but we'll make sure that on election night, if we have to declare that Joe Biden is both the most popular and the second most popular, presidents of all time, 81 million votes in 2020, 85 million or whatever they need, they're just going to be ready to bring them in, gym bags and place them all ballots right there at the booth to be counted.
Yeah, because there's a sort of rule that you can't say anything that I've worked it out slowly over a period of time. Anything you're not allowed to say, you should say a lot.
Yeah.
And one of those things is the tampering of the American election, which is now proven. Zuckerberg obviously did his bit to rig the election with his $400 million investment. We had the Twitter files. We had the shutting down of anything to do with the Hunter Biden laptop. A lot of Americans still think that's Russian disinformation. It's all proven. Hillary Clinton acted unlawfully. Last week, so Hunter Biden's trial starts either yesterday or today, his gun trial. Last week, Joe Biden went over to his daughter-in-law. That's evidence.
It's tampering.
And this stuff, they do it willy-nilly. And I'm just going, what is the defense of the right, which is not the right, say those that wish to be good, against those that will do evil? What's the way, does it inexorably lead to violence? I mean, is that where it heads?
It does seem like that's where we're headed. And it does feel to me like they're trying to provoke it.
Yeah.
You treat the American people with this level of contempt in the hopes that someone will, some little militia band will respond so they can declare martial law or pull out the National Guard and say, we can't have elections in the fall. In talking about some of these protests and such, though, I want to ask you, because you were at the head of, they say 20,000. Honestly, to me, it could have been 50,000. It looked like a huge number of people who are protesting right here in this city, in London, in Parliament Square. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was on the weekend. There's a man who's been vilified and hated by the media for a very long time called Tommy Robinson in the UK. And he originally came onto the scene in his own hometown of Luton because he said, the Muslim immigration into Luton was really, really damaging the social fabric. And he said it was damaging the social fabric between black and white communities as well, because, people there's obviously tensions often between races, but, broadly on the same kind of track, the black and white communities, church families and, that sort of thing. And he complained about that. That made him a pariah. He was quite he came from a rough side of town. So he was also had a few problems with the law anyway. And then he started reporting on these what can only be called child rape gangs all over England, which were predominantly, the culprits of these child rape gangs are predominantly Pakistani Muslim men.
A few Afghans, yeah.
Yeah, but overwhelming representation. He started saying it. So he would go outside court and record them and try and get the information out to the people, because the police tried to cover it up because they didn't want to be seen as racist. Anyway, he was completely cancelled and destroyed and imprisoned. They really tried to end his... I mean, he's been through hell. And then Musk comes back and goes, you can have your Twitter page back. So he's cleaned his act up. He's very, very sober. He's very, very energetic. I mean, the guy makes Ben Shapiro look like he talks in a lazy southern drawl. He speaks rocket speed like that. He's a brilliant guy, and he's back on Twitter, and he's energizing people. And I've been saying for a long time, I don't think there's a political solution to a cultural problem. It's very difficult, especially if you don't have, I mean, we do now after Farage yesterday, but if you do not have a political party that wants to address the cultural issues of the day, which essentially almost all political problems are cultural problems as well, if they will just avoid it, there is no political solution. So we all got together, we have this group, and we're putting very slowly, we're going to do another one on the 27th, but just last weekend we did our first meeting to talk about, free speech fundamentally, and then our a major objection to the two-tier policing that we see in London, where you can chant for the death of Jews, you can attack Jews in the street, you can, anti-Semitism is just sort of, okay, totally fine, we sort of, it's not really that bad, brush it under the carpet, people get off. And if you are a black guy in an England flag, you'll be beaten, floored and maced by the cops. And this is all done in service of the terrible, at least they're giving us a name for this religion now, the diversity, equity and inclusion religion. Which means that any person of coloured skin can do no wrong, can commit no crime, because they are systemically oppressed by dreadful old whitey. So we held the rally. And we didn't know what the numbers were going to be. We thought it would be, I phoned up, I had a friend, the guy who walks my dogs when I'm working, came and he was like, I'm coming. It's the first time I felt hopeful that someone's going to represent my voice. And they turned up, and it was tens and tens of thousands. And they filled Parliament Square, and a lot of speeches were given. Tommy makes films now as well, because he's a journalist, much better journalist than anyone you'll find on the BBC, about two-tier policing. And what moved me, it was a very happy event. We had a wonderful woman singing. She was great. We tried to keep it joyful, and we tried to give, the great unwashed and the ignored of Britain a chance to be heard. And it was a huge, resounding success. But the thing that I noticed is whenever you look at one of these little campus social justice, fake sort of fancy dressed civil rights movements, whenever they leave, they just leave shit everywhere.
Yeah.
Tents, crap, all the plastic, especially if they're Just Stop Oil protesters. It's just detritus and crap everywhere. They disrespect everything, break windows, do all that, graffiti, everything. It was left. There wasn't a single piece of litter left. And these are the great people of the country. And seeing as I got kicked into politics, I didn't want to get into politics at all. I was quite happy acting, but I just couldn't lie. I thought, if I'm going to get kicked into politics, and my position in that is to provide a voice for those that will not be provided a voice by anybody else. So we've got together, we work as a sort of loose coalition, which is tightening up, to create a movement to put pressure on the government to address the issues we want to do. And we see yesterday, and I mean, look, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's any accident that Nigel Farage has said, I'm not standing this time in the UK, and then we have this huge rally and it goes mental, and something's changed his mind. So he thinks, because he's a guy of great timing, and he's always one to come in and finish the job and take credit for it. Bless him, and I have no problem with that. But I wonder whether he saw that rally, he saw those people.
How could he not have? He
saw the passion, and he thought, maybe it's time, and I this is my shot. So it was the first of what we hope is going to be a movement, which is going to be led on what we're going to call the pledge, and it's going to be pledges based on principles, on unalterable and unimpeachable principles that are based on the individual and on the greater and broader society, but very, very simple principles in regards to freedom of speech and equality and all of these sorts of things. So yeah, it was astonishing, and it was brilliant. And I love to see it, and I want to get Trump to do a message for our next one, because we're going to move it to Trafalgar Square, I think, next time, and see if we can fill Trafalgar Square. And then once we do that, they will have to listen. I mean, they're listening anyway, but they'll have to.
I think you could have filled it with the crowd that you had just this past week. I mean, it was that impressive, and yet media has tried to present it as far right, racist, radicals, fighting, all these kinds of things. And that is, tell me if I'm mistaken here, but the police officer died, who was stabbed in the back of the neck. Was he an Afghan?
No, I don't think the police officer was an Afghan, but the killer was, yeah.
The killer, yes. Yeah. So a Muslim who stabbed him, and that took place sort of on the fringe of this. Is that not correct?
That was in Germany.
Excuse me.
That was in Mannheim.
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
So there was
another kind of gathering of some kind there that was going on, and this police officer, he subdues the guy who was trying to stop the guy who had the knife, and he ends up getting stabbed in the back of the neck. Initial reports were that he was fine, he was recovering, and then all of a sudden yesterday, I see that he's died. But yes, I've forgotten that wasn't here in London. That was
it was a movement. I think it's called Pax Europa, and I think that when Germany, for example, let in 1.5 million migrants in one swathe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really big piece of social engineering that, for which you have no way of estimating what the repercussions and the offshoots of doing something like that are. And I think places like Germany and places like Sweden and France to a degree, but it's been a problem in France for longer, are going, this is a disastrous experiment, because what people like to do is they like to say that if you criticize Islam, you're criticizing Muslims. You're not. You're saying, I do not like what Islam does to countries when it becomes the predominant religion. That doesn't mean I don't like Muslims. That means I don't like the ideology. I don't like this ideology. And to me, I've said it before, I think it's a cult, and I don't like it at all. But that's not to say that I couldn't love a Muslim. But what we're being told...
But they don't share the culture.
No.
They have no desire to share the culture.
It's an alien culture.
I was talking with our good, tech guy over here. I've been in Nigeria. I've been in his home country. And the Christians in that country, I mean, these are the kind of things that people in the West just have no understanding of, no idea of. But I was at Plateau State. This is after the Troubles began in 2012, where the way it looked there, what the Nigerians themselves would tell you, that beginning in the early 2000s, truckloads of children, Muslim children, were brought in. This is happening all over West Africa, by the way. But Nigeria was one of the first. And they would bring truckloads of children off and just drop them off. And people were wondering, what in the world is going on here? And those children would be begging at gas stations, gathering around potholes and these kind of things where cars have to slow down, and they'd be selling trinkets and this sort of thing. And then an imam would be sent in to teach them, to give them a little bit of food here and there, and to radicalize them. And then when they were ready to launch an attack on the Christian leadership within a given community, they'd arm these kids with AK-47s and say, tell us where the vicar lives. And this is going on all over West Africa and all over central and northern Nigeria. It will begin to move further to the south. And I've sat with these people and heard their stories as they're sitting in their homes watching television. Suddenly, bullets are flying through the windows. Whenever they've tried to defend themselves, the United Nations comes in and says it's a human rights violation and disarms them so that they're vulnerable again to yet more attacks. But Westerners, at least in the United States, they have very little understanding of Islam as a religion. And because they've been so inculcated with this idea of diversity, that is wonderful. Diversity is our strength.
Yeah. And
you're going, no, you don't understand. These are not, and I'm talking about, by the way, not those Muslims who have been westernized.
Yeah.
Who aren't really Muslim. They have some kind of a vague Muslim heritage, but I'm talking about the ones who take the Hadith, the Quran, the life of Muhammad very, very seriously. Those are people who have nothing but contempt for the West, nothing but contempt for its culture, and for its women. And so when you're talking about things like the Rotherham scandal, which you've kind of touched on, but those rape gangs are not just in Rotherham, they're
Everywhere.
all over Europe. Almost no one has been prosecuted. And I thought this was very interesting. I had breakfast with Melanie Phillips, who you will know, who writes for the Times. Gosh, I think it was 2016 maybe that on this particular occasion, the Rotherham scandal was still very much in the news here. And she was telling me that when that was first broken, that story was first reported by one of her colleagues, that the Times edited the story to say that the rape gangs were quote unquote Asians. And of course, the Chinese and the Sikhs and others said, hold on just a second. This isn't us. We're not the ones who are doing this. And the Times actually had to go back and issue a correction and say, well, it's Pakistanis and Afghans. But even then, they didn't want to mention Islam, which was key to what was happening.
They didn't want to mention Islam with this guy in Mannheim either. They said, police officer dies at far-right protest.
Yes.
That's the BBC.
That's their headline.
And that is, if they don't understand how much that is going to enrage people who have eyes and ears and can see it.
And who know what the reality is. They know what the whole thing, well, they know what it's all about. And to me, that's pretty incredible, because oddly, it becomes racist when you make it about Afghans or Pakistanis versus about the ideology that they've adopted that says they can do this to non-Muslim women, that they're allowed to do this. And so some of these girls, and they were almost all at-risk girls, often adolescent girls, they would say that those who are raping them would quote the Quran while they're raping them, while they're beating them, drugging them, videoing them, taking them from one part of the city, one part of the country to another, and almost no one was speaking out on their behalf. Instead, what we hear about in the States is whether or not Meghan Markle has been treated, badly because she's a person of color. I mean, that to me is just outrageous. If you want a real Me Too movement, you want a real cause, save these poor girls from being raped. Yeah. But nobody cares, and nobody's being punished for that. And that's an extraordinary tragedy. It hasn't happened yet I think the Times called it an industrial scale rape. That's the way they put it correctly. We haven't seen anything quite like that in the United States, and that's because our Muslim population is minuscule compared to your own. Now, there are those like Ilhan Omar who want to change that. They're flying them into the United States now from places like Somalia and Afghanistan. But for the most part, the migrants who are coming into the United States are coming from broadly Catholic, countries in Central and South America, which makes her a very different kind of migrant. Yeah. And I've just spent, in a couple of months ago, I was in the Darien Gap. I was in the jungles of the Darien Gap. I've been following some of these migrant groups. I was recently in Colombia, Panama, Mexico City, following them, interviewing them, engaging them in conversation. I've been doing it on and off for about the last 5 years, and that's been fascinating. But they're a very different kind of migrant on the whole than what you're getting here in Britain. And these are people who, again, this just fascinates me. They're people who are fleeing the very policies that Democrats are trying to bring into the United States. So you mentioned socialism to them. They know what it is because they're fleeing a socialist, shithole like Venezuela, for instance. Colombia will soon be headed in that same direction. Peru, Chile, they've all fallen, Brazil, they've all fallen in very similar dubious elections to Marxists. And people see this and they know what's coming. They Colombia, as I say, I've been in Colombia probably 10 times in the last, 5 years. And Colombia, since the days of Pablo Escobar, has been making, small strides, but noticeable strides towards progress. Medellin, once per capita murder capital of the world, Medellin now is largely a safe city. That's going to change now that Petro is in power. A Marxist, a literal terrorist, who is now going to take them back in the direction that they've come from. And so these people see what this is, and they're trying to go to the United States. And I find myself fighting kind of a losing battle and arguing with people in the United States and saying, if you lived in one of these countries, you would do this too.
Yeah.
You would flee this to try to get to the United States. Now, the Biden administration is doing everything they can to facilitate them coming into the United States in very dubious ways that undermine American law, immigration law, eroding our borders. But on the whole, our migrant issue is different in fundamental ways than yours.
It has there's a similarity in the fact that it's very interesting, as you said, that people flee shitholes in order to, as Trump calls them, people flee shitholes in order to turn the new place that they've arrived into another shithole.
Yeah,
and it's the same as people flee Sharia law in Arab countries, and they come to England and they try and impose Sharia law.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's that idea of, I can't remember who said it, someone said it, I remember it really resonated with me in a book, and I think you then quoted Augustine back at me, which was, if you can't migrate intellectually, you migrate geographically.
Yeah.
If you can't allow your ideas to reform and refine, as Christianity has done, and it doesn't seem to be that Islam has done, then you have to spread out and take it out with you, and that's an existential threat. And I wonder whether what Biden is doing with his, I don't know, at least best, what are they saying, about 20 million, not just in Biden's, but in the last few years. In Biden's, they're saying something like about 5 million.
Yeah.
That what he's doing is he's replacing the black vote, who are now turning over to Trump. And that now he's going to get in a whole bunch of, a whole new bunch of brand new Democrat voters to pay for by, printing money and wiping off student debt and stuff like that. That's what's, Trump was the first person that actually made the border a really big deal.
Yeah.
Didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Listen, I think that Islam creates cookie cutter societies. You only need to go to any truly Islamic state to discover this. And I've been in a few, and they're all the same. There's very little variation among them. I mean, they repeat the pattern. And what is happening in, say, moderate Muslim countries like, say, for instance, Turkey, is that eventually those missionaries, if I may call them that, these radical clerics are sent in to make those Muslims who are associating with the Christian population and getting along just fine, to radicalize them. And the way they do that is to make them feel like bad Muslims. I recall one Muslim telling me that who had to meet in secret to tell his story because he was under a fatwa. I mean, there was an effort to murder him. But he said that the majority of Muslims, what we call moderate Muslims, don't want to read the Quran because they know what's in the Quran, and they don't want to feel like they're bad Muslims. And
You've read the Quran lots of times. Can you just describe to me what the Quran, for those of us who haven't read it?
It's unreadable. Because there's no central thesis. There's been numerous efforts to write and rewrite the Quran, unlike the Bible. There's been numerous efforts to try to change it. A friend of mine, Jay Smith, somebody you should get on this program. He lived here in London for 25 years and took on the radicals down at Speaker's Corner. And I would go down there with him on occasion and debate, getting literally up on the ladder there, and hundreds would gather around to debate a given issue. I mean, it's so funny. Years ago, CNN International, which is here in London, called me in the States and said, would you be willing to come on and debate free speech with a Muslim? And I said, yes. And then when I hung up the phone, I was like, yes. I mean, like, CNN International, as I was telling my staff, I said, I mean, they're in London. They could get a real Muslim. Well, the next thing I know is I find myself, I'm debating a former Baptist hippie Muslim from North Carolina who knows nothing about Islam, and she's defending free speech. And I said, no, that's your American Judeo-Christian roots that's speaking there. I said, name for me a single Islamic state where free speech exists, where church bells ring out. There isn't one. I mean, she knew nothing about, and this is the face of Islam that we're frequently presented with. It's not the real one. The real ones gather down at Speaker's Corner every Sunday afternoon at 2 or 3 o'clock, and you can have a meaningful debate with them there. It can be somewhat dicey on occasion. Jay has a nice scar right here at his neck where there was an effort to cut his throat after one of these debates, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. But what Jay would do is, he said we would go down there with carefully marked Qurans and would show them that this Quran differs from that Quran, from that Quran, from that Quran, from that Quran, and that and I don't mean, we're not talking about
NIV versus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're not talking about just some modest change in the language to update it so that people can understand what it actually says. But we're talking fundamental differences in those Qurans. And it presented those Muslims who would come there with a real problem, because they didn't know how to answer this. They were used to attacking the Bible, and they were used to attacking the Bible with Christians who didn't know the Bible. And thus they were very effective in debate before Jay took this over and started going down there and first addressing their biblical questions, but then he took the offensive and went after the Quran, which almost no one is willing to do that. The Quran itself is, I mean, it's violent. I mean, if we set up, he does something very simple, so I don't want to take credit for this. This is the way he puts it. We always talk about the book and the man, the book and the man. So Jesus and the Bible versus Muhammad and the Quran. What are the differences? Well, Muhammad fought over 80 battles. Jesus fought none. Muhammad advocated rape. Jesus didn't. Muhammad was a misogynist. Jesus elevated the role of women, revealed himself, his resurrected self, first to a woman, which according to Jewish law at the time, they couldn't give testimony. I mean, this was by design. We're going to turn the culture in some sense kind of upside down. Jesus was a man of peace. Muhammad was a man of war. I mean, there are massive differences. And Jesus taught peace. That wasn't what Muhammad taught. So when you compare the book and the man, you begin to understand why there are fundamental differences in those societies that are deeply influenced by Judeo-Christian worldview, whether it's Christian or not. You know, Britain has been a Christian society. And I mean this, you know, I don't mean everyone.
Well, our values, our institutions, our systems
are drawn from it.
Yeah,
it has been fundamental to your culture. It has defined your culture. And now that is changing, because for the last, maybe half century, Britain has been running off of the accumulated capital of a Christian culture, which has given life to its laws, to its literature, to all of its institutions. And a secularized Britain has discovered, at least some are starting to discover, that it's toothless against Islam. You know what the peak of church attendance was in Britain?
Right.
The 1950s.
I was going to say the 50s.
On the heels of the Billy Graham Crusades.
Wow.
The heels of the Billy Graham Crusades. That was the peak of church attendance in Britain. But as Britain has suffered, and I will use the word suffered, under a radical secularism, the result is that you become much more vulnerable. And this is happening in the United States with the erosion of our own Christian institutions, our own Christian faith, that you become vulnerable to a virulent Islam, because it's toothless against it. These are often people, listen, in some sense, I can have respect for the radical Muslim who truly believes in something. And see, Christians, real Christians, can understand Islam, at least to this extent. The secular mindset says there's nothing worth dying for. I mean, this life is all you get. That isn't the way Muslims think. And if you think back to 9/11, for instance, all the head scratching throughout the Western world, and particularly in my own country, went along the lines of, these people had to be crazy. I mean, who flies a plane into a building on purpose? It had to be just absolutely unhinged. Well, no, they weren't unhinged. It's a perfectly rational decision within the context of their own worldview, which says that a martyr achieves heaven, says that you get how many virgins?
72 or 3. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
you get your own, paradise as a result of that. So if you truly believed that your own family would be saved, for eternity as a result of your martyr's act, it makes sense within that. But from a secularist mindset, it makes no sense at all. Well, Christians at least can understand that. They can understand what would motivate them, while at the same time thinking, well, that's a false God, that's a false religion, that's a false hope. But I can respect that they believe deeply in their own faith and they're willing to fight for it. What in secularism is worth fighting for?
Nothing. I mean, it's poisoned secularism, and it's poisoned our own Church of England, which I think is probably what was worth doing anyway, because that Church of England basically was just Henry VIII's divorce court, wasn't it, at the end of the day? But let's switch on to, because people are finding out that you've done a lot of traveling, you've been to a lot of places. Can we just move on to Ukraine?
Yes.
And to tell us a little bit of the story of how Sasha came into your life, and then also to tell us about, why the West is fawning over Ukraine, because you've had a huge experience of that country, and there's a very famous, and if we can find it and put it in, we'll have a picture of Larry's conversation with Theresa May caught in stills, which is hilarious. But so if you could tell us a bit about Sasha, and then a bit about what your thoughts on Ukraine are and why the West is behaving in the way it is towards Ukraine.
Well, maybe I should preface that by saying that my background is in Russian history, European history in general, Russian history. So I taught the subject for some time. I've spent a fair amount of time in Eastern Europe, in Russia, in Ukraine, and there's much I can appreciate about both, meaning I've met some amazing people within those countries. But as governments, they're deeply, deeply corrupt countries. They mirror one another in this. And before most Americans could find Ukraine on a map, so before our present war and any controversy over Ukraine, 2009, my wife and my 3 boys went to Ukraine with our church to work in an orphanage, doing things, Bible stories and playing with the kids and building them a playground, showers, just some basic things for these children who have nothing, because these are truly what Jesus called the least of these, people that, and within a culture like that, they just don't care about them. So these are children who are frequently subjected to sexual molestation, neglect of every kind, abuse of every kind. I only hint at the kind of abuse that Sasha suffered. I mean, if you really want to hear the real story, and even then, she's withholding quite a lot. I did an interview with her, on my own show, and that got an awful lot of attention on the heels of the film Sound of Freedom, which deals with child trafficking, which Sasha knows quite a lot about. But anyway, while Lori and the boys were there, Lori sent me a lengthy email that sort of began like, "Hear me out," and it was, "We should adopt this little girl." And I told her that I was open. That was about all that I said, that I was open. But, I'm thinking in terms of all the hurdles. I'm thinking in terms of how much this is going to cost, and do we have money to do this? And the answer was definitely no. And an adoption was about $50,000. We would have to go to Ukraine. Do I have time for that? But we're not talking puppies here. We're talking about a human being. And if we have the chance to change the life of just one human being, if that door's open, you've got to walk through it. And so we did. And we went to Ukraine. I'd already been in Ukraine several times, and I've been in Ukraine several times since. And so I was very familiar with the political culture, with the culture itself. And it was everything that I expected and worse, which is to say that Lori would be sitting in a meeting, say, with some government official, and I would slip out of the room to go and snap pictures of the orphanage and to go places that they didn't want you to see, because they present you with Ukrainians and Russians are very skilled at presenting you with the Potemkin village. You know, the control tour.
This is the perfect supermarket in the perfect place, but it's not.
It's what Tucker Carlson saw. He went to Moscow. It was his first time in Russia, and I think Tucker Carlson is brilliant and does a lot of wonderful things. But I thought, could you possibly be more naive when he came back from Moscow talking about what a beautiful city it is and how wonderful it was? And I thought, no, the Russians showed you a Potemkin village. They showed you what they wanted you to see. It's a third world country, which has some nice things in the metropolitan centers, but don't extrapolate from that it's a free and wonderful society. So while there, you know, you're butting up against this corruption in a very real flesh and blood way. So that previously, for instance, I might be with a Ukrainian or a Russian friend who, let's say, has to get his car tags, and you know that in order to get them, his license plate, he has to pay an official behind the counter in order to achieve that. Now, Americans aren't used to that kind of corruption. If I was asked at the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, you know, for an extra $20 or $100, I would say, I want to speak to your boss. In Ukraine, that does you no good because the boss is in on it. They're all in on it. To call the police is to make your situation worse because everyone.
They're in on it too.
Everyone is in on it. So I had to bribe every single official but one in order to make that adoption possible. And as we're getting to know Sasha and we were discovering, you know, the things that were going on in her life, what was kind of interesting about all this for me, Laza, was the fact that I had just come out of debating, Christopher Hitchens or something like that. And one of the things that always struck me about the new atheists is while they might be very sophisticated in their understanding of geopolitics or, let's say, science, in the case of a Richard Dawkins, they're historically naive. And they would always talk about history and about atheism as though it had never been tried at a governmental level, which always struck me as incredible because you're going like, are you familiar with Mao? Have you ever heard of him? Who killed roughly 70 million, of his own people. I said that at the University of Beijing. And interestingly enough, my last attempt to go to China, they blocked my visa. They said I would not be allowed. So seems that somebody was listening and didn't appreciate what I had to say. But Ukraine, human beings are just mere mortar, the brick and mortar for the building of the utopian state. Same throughout the whole of the former East Bloc, except for those places where there was strong Western, that is to say Latin Christian influence, like say, for instance, Poland or Czech Republic. They've made the jump to a free society much more successfully than, say, Moldova or Ukraine or, of course, Russia itself. So this was the kind of corruption that we were running up against here. And I thought, I was blogging, some of this, and I got a call from a friend, and she said, stop it. Stop blogging this. She says, this needs to be a book. And that became The Grace Effect, which you read. And because I'm an egomaniac, I had you read that book while you were sitting on my dock at my own house.
Well, you did let me shoot ARs between.
I did let you shoot ARs in between, so I did bribe you with that.
Yeah.
But Sasha's story is very powerful because we often, when we're talking about these kind of policies, and it's like a giant pincer movement into the United States or into the West. We have Islam on one hand, which we've just discussed, but on the other is this radical, militant secularism. And it's being driven by utopians who, like all utopians, they're interested in the millions, never the one.
Yeah,
they talk of the millions, the nameless millions. I love what Dostoevsky said, and I won't get the quotation exactly right, but he said something along the lines of it's in The Brothers Karamazov that the typical European liberal loves man in the abstract, just not in the specific.
Yeah.
They don't want to live next to them. They don't want to know them. They don't want to rub elbows with them. And I think that from a Christian point of view, we're interested in the one, not the millions. And philosophically, meaning we're interested in knowing that person who's right across from us, the person who is our neighbor. and knowing them and affecting and changing their lives, having an impact on their lives. In this case, our neighbor was Sasha. And we had the ability, the power, as it were, to have an effect upon her life. And so, and I have to say this too, Sasha's probably changed my life more than I changed Sasha's life. She would argue that, but maybe the point isn't that important. But the point is, she's a remarkable human being that I hope you meet eventually. She's thriving. She's a wife. She's a mother. She's a very good mother, and she was so worried that she wouldn't be, because she herself had been abandoned at birth and spent the first 10 years of her life growing up in 3 different Ukrainian orphanages. And it made her think, maybe there's something in my own DNA that will make me do that. And I'm like, no, Sasha, you won't do that. And you will be a good mother. And her own mother, I suspect, didn't have any choices. I theorize that her mother was probably a product of the orphanage system. They're kind of self-perpetuating because, as you see, they kick these children out of the orphanage at age 16. And where are they going to go? Well, what ends up happening is some mafia type says, here's $100. And what do? They go blow it at McDonald's, or wherever. And then they come back for more, and they say, well, now this time I need you to do me a favor. And that usually means 60% of the girls end up in prostitution. Many of them are dead by the time they're 30. And Sasha herself was born HIV positive, and through no fault of her own. She inherited that from her mother. But once she came to the United States, her life was touched by grace in a very powerful way. And that disease is very well managed in her life now, and so that she can, she can be a mother. I mean, she didn't adopt her child. She. Can
I ask a personal question? Is the medical technology available to protect the child from inheriting the disease?
It's very rare that the child gets the disease. Our granddaughter, Abby Kate, she did not inherit it. Or even, her husband. And it's because it's in a blood test, it's virtually undetectable.
Right.
So long as she takes her medication. And Sasha has to always be reminded, but she does. And she's healthy, she's thriving, she's doing wonderfully. But it's the difference. What I wanted to do in that book is to say, do you understand? Lord of the Rings author William Golding said this, and I just happened to find this.
Lord of the Flies.
Excuse me, what did I say?
Lord of the Rings. I was right.
Well, another wonderful series that my boys enjoyed, Lord of the Flies, and not Lord of the Dance either. So not Michael Flatley dancing around with his arm stiff at his side.
His legs move about as though independent from his body.
Yes, it's kind of funny to watch that, but. Lord of the Flies author William Golding, I found his book proposal online for this book. He hadn't really published much of anything, and he had to say, to describe what he was planning to write and then say what the thesis of this proposed book would be. And he said this, he said that it was his purpose to demonstrate that the problems of human society are the problems of human nature. And for me, that's so wonderful, because if you believe that human nature is the same the world over, which any intelligent person would believe, then the question becomes, well, then how do you account for a North Korea, say, versus a Britain or a United States? Well, the answer is found in the ideologies that they adopt. And some ideologies are like gasoline on the flame of our darker impulses. So a religion like Islam, which was invented by men for men, to say, you like violence, you can have it. You want to rape women, you can do it. You want to steal, pillage, you can do it. I mean, look at the kind of societies you get with that. Or a Christian faith that says
you're fallen.
That you are fallen. Jeremiah 17:9 that says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And thus we need our darker impulses must be restrained. So me being a Christian, I love the way Evelyn Waugh put it, Brideshead Revisited author, not Lord of the Flies or Lord of the Rings author. He said, someone said to him what a horrible person he was. And he said, yes, and imagine how much worse I would be if I were not a Christian. So it isn't that it makes me good, but it restrains me from being, it makes me just a little less evil than I might be. And the impact on a society is massive. And the data bears this out in giving, hospitals built, all these kinds of things. A society that has been touched by the gospel is a restrained society. And there'll be somebody who's going to say, yeah, but what about these priests who've done, there's human nature remains. It is what it is. Evil remains. My own evil remains. Your own evil remains. But we become less evil than we might otherwise be, and it transforms the society. So what I wanted to do in that particular book was to say, let me show you the theories that new atheists act like this has never been tried. And I'm telling you that it has. For 75 years, Soviet atheists had their way with the economy, with the military, with education, with the whole of society as their own laboratory to do whatever they wanted. And it led to unrelenting backwardness, bloodshed, turmoil, genocide, spiritual, physical assassination. That's what happened. So looking at Sasha's life, comparing it in a society like that, and then what it looked like when she came to the United States and how much differently people treated her in the United States. Were their natures different? No. But they had been influenced very deeply by a different ethos. And that plays out in the real world in a fundamentally important way.
And that's almost, one wonders whether that is why the utopians, who love zero, everything zero COVID, net zero, and all of this sort of stuff, I think that they need zero Christians. Because it does seem to me to be the only way to stop man being how Jeremiah described his heart. It's like, it's even before I became a Christian, I knew that we were bad people. And I would judge a lot of I would ask certainly girlfriends and things like that, and even mates, I would ask them quite early on if I was deciding how much time I wanted to invest in them, whether they thought we were good or bad people. And it's amazing the people that think they're good people, the badness that I've seen people who think they're good will do in the name of goodness and kindness, human goodness and kindness. I mean, look, we have it written all over the internet, don't we, in the Be Kind Brigade. You've got to be kind to the mother and the family who support the mutilation of their child. It's an act of kindness to allow to remove the genitals of a confused and dysphoric child. It's human beings are. I think this is one of the things that is so true. You said to me that very powerful thing when I was stressing out about my kids, and you said, "Do you trust them to God?" And I was like, "Yes, I do, 100%, no problem at all." And I think if you'd said, "Do you trust them to the orphanage system, or do you trust them to the state?" I would say no. Not a chance in hell. And in fact, every time I've rubbed up against the state with anything to do with my children, I've been utterly appalled. And there's huge numbers of fathers who are in abject pain as a result of this. So I think they're trying to wipe out Christianity. And I think the church in England, certainly, this is what it was, we went to the mega church with you, and I said, how do you tell whether this is a good church or not? And you said, well, it depends. They will use scripture. Scripture will be at the center of everything they do. And a bad church is some guy with a big ego wandering around telling everyone what they should think of what he thinks of what the scripture says. So it's interesting watching the Church of England, which is big argument that it's having at the moment, is about same-sex marriage and homosexuality and transgenderism.
Which would all be resolved if they bothered to look at the book they claim to base their practices on. It's incredible. I think what you're seeing in the West is I think the radicals recognize what a lot of Christians, or at least people who would say that they're Christians, often don't recognize, and that is that Christianity itself must be destroyed. And it's because Christians are by nature rebels. And that is because to quote a man who had a real influence on my own thinking, a theologian by the name of Francis Schaeffer, he said this. He said, "No totalitarian or authoritarian regime can tolerate a people who say that they have an absolute universal standard by which all men and their governments are judged, because you see, they will always say that there's a higher power." And the West, America in particular, was birthed on the idea that there are laws that supersede the laws of mankind. So that take the Declaration of Independence, that appeals to the laws of God. It says, we know that these are laws of men, but they're damnable laws. And we know that they're damnable laws because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit. So it's saying, yeah, we know what the law says, but there's a higher law, and we're appealing to that court, and thus we're condemning these. Schaeffer argues, and he's right, he's absolutely right about this. He argues that that's why Christianity has to be wiped out, because they wanted people who don't believe such things that will accept that the state is their God. That is the highest court. There's no law that sits above that, and that's where we find ourselves. And I think Islam is being used. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so Islam is being used as by the secularists as a weapon against Christianity to destroy Christianity within the culture.
So that's why there is this sort of very strange alliance between leftism and Islam. But unfortunately, I think, and that's also quite historically pertinent, that once Islam is done with its leftists, those are the first to go, right? Yeah,
I think so. I'm wondering if they are. I think they have miscalculated. I think they think, the WEF types, the globalists, I think that somewhere in some bunker where they plan these things, they believe that because they hold the levers of power, which in today's world are largely technological. They have the drones, they have big tech, they will have this sophisticated digital ID and currency system that they'll be able to control vast populations of anybody, of whatever the ideological stripe. I'm not sure that's going to play out quite the way they think it is, particularly with the kind of numbers that we're talking about of Muslims that are now colonizing all over the West. But the fact of the matter is, Christianity, it has provided a basis for our freedoms in the West. And there are those who think they can kick out the substructure and keep the superstructure. And you just cannot do that.
No.
T.S. Eliot, if Christianity goes, the whole culture goes.
Is that what T.S. Eliot said?
He did say that.
What my favorite line in the whole world of ever written by anybody is written by T.S. Eliot, and I still don't know why it is my favorite line.
What is that?
And I don't really know what it means either, but it means something profound to me.
Well, what is that?
There is, it seems to us at least, only a limited value in the knowledge gained from experience, because experience imposes a pattern and falsifies. For every moment is a new and shocking valuation of all that we have been.
Okay, break that down for us. Tell us what that means.
I don't know what it means. What I think it is it's a sort of, there is, it seemed to us, at least, only a limited value in the knowledge gained from experience. It's basically, I think it's trying to, he was always obsessing through those four quartets, particularly over time present, time past, both perhaps present and time future. I think he was trying to absolve you of your shame. That's what I sense each moment. But then also remind you that there's going to be a new one coming. A new and shocking valuation of all that we have been will be each moment. And I think it's a sort of, he's appealing to you to, in a more biblical way to live in the present, rather than in a hippie way of living in the present, which is all the shit you've done, which is bad. It wasn't bad. And all the horrible stuff you're going to do isn't bad either. What he's saying is everything that happens in your life, every moment is new and shocking. to you, and you therefore you have choice within that. I think that's probably what it means to me. But it just grabbed me when I read it, and I can never forget it. I say it to myself at least once a day.
Maybe this feels unrelated, but what you're saying, and then what you said just a few minutes ago, as it relates to people being basically good, thinking that they're basically good. That has been that cliche is used all the time. Restored my faith in humanity. I mean, if there's anything that history says you should not put your faith in, it is humanity, right? But we hear people naively tossing that about every now and then. And what I find very interesting about that, historically speaking, is that mentality, the idea that people are basically good, leads to genocides. And why does it lead to genocides? Well, it leads to genocides because you then come to the conclusion that those people who are bad, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, and they can be separated out from society and destroyed. So that an Adolf Hitler, for instance, would say, well, it's the Jews who are bad. It's the Gypsies who are bad. It's the Christians who are bad. We separate them out from the whole, and we can destroy them. And I recall, I think it's George Bernard Shaw. It was George Bernard Shaw who was invited by Stalin to see his, Soviet utopia in 1931, and he was shown a Potemkin village, and he came back, and he said that, and of course, Bernard Shaw was a hardcore atheist and communist. Dostoevsky would say they're the same thing, but he came back and he said, Stalin's killing the right people. He's killing the right people. So that Bernard Shaw was of the view we have to separate out from society. He wrote an essay on the importance of the gas chamber. The gas chamber. This is the part about George Bernard Shaw that is never discussed. And meaning
venerated in my drama school.
Yes. We separate him out. We separate the bad guys out from society, and we can kill them. Compare that with Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who in Gulag Archipelago says he's telling the story of when he was being tortured. He was held to the ground. He had been arrested, of course, in Stalin's Russia. And he's, as I recall, he's restrained. He's being restrained on the floor, naked. And he said they used women often to torture because it was particularly humiliating. And he says this woman she has her boot on my testicles, and she is slowly leaning forward and putting more and more pressure. And he thinks to himself that if he could, he would kill them all. He would kill them all, these KGB interrogators. But then he goes on to talk about how they'd come around recruiting on his campus. He'd almost become one of them. And that's followed with this line, a very profound line. He says, the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. When you adopt the idea that people are basically good and that there are just some that are broken, you're buying into a falsehood that has massive consequences for your own thinking and for societal thinking, rather than going, you know what, we're all fundamentally broken and we all need redemption. We all need something to restrain us from what we might do to each other. And if we're ever honest with ourselves, and very few of us are, it's one of the things, by the way, that I think is actually very remarkable about you. I don't know how well your audience knows you in terms of your own show and your own commentary, but just sitting, in my truck, driving around all over the South and eating in barbecue restaurants and shooting AR-15s. These are all things that you're allowed to do in the United States, at least in the part of the United States where I live, and sitting on my dock and on my porch smoking nice Cuban cigars, illegal though they are in my country. You are a remarkably self-aware person. And I detected this also in your dad at dinner the other night, and I thought, okay, he's come by this honestly. You have a remarkable ability to self-reflect, and very few people do that. Most of us don't want to do that. We play whack-a-mole with it. Did you ever have that game here? We play whack-a-mole with it. We don't want the silence. We don't want to be alone with our own thoughts. We don't want to evaluate ourselves because we don't really want to know ourselves, because we're afraid of what we might find there. But when we are honest in evaluating ourselves, most of us want to say we're a good guy. Not as good as some, but better than most. And when we really evaluate the intentions of our hearts, honestly, frequently we're going to find evil there, even in some of the good things that we might do, that they're motivated maybe for selfish reasons. And hence the reason that we need restraint. We need redemption. We need something that is from the outside, not from the inside. Blaise Pascal said, do not look within for the cure to all of your miseries, for what you will find there is not the true and the good.
Yeah.
And it isn't. It isn't the true and the good that we find within ourselves. We have to look outside of ourselves. But the utopians don't think like this.
No, I think that idea that you're fundamentally good is an excuse. I mean, obviously you say the repercussions are beyond, but it's an excuse to do evil. It's a free pass to do evil. I also think that...
Whoa. Well, before you go on with that, explain that.
Well, if you think you're good, then those that don't agree with you are not good.
Okay.
And therefore, the good thing to do is kill
to get rid of them. Yeah.
That makes perfect logical sense to me. I'm always shocked by the looks of the faces of the people that hate me, which I don't encounter too much, but I'm encountering more because I'm seeing a lot more Satan in the world anyway than I've seen before. Maybe it's just because I'm closer to it in my little wars that I'm taking place in, but you can see it in their eyes. They want you dead.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't bat an eyelid at your own death. So I suppose a difficult relationship one has to have is I'm very grateful for your compliment about my self-awareness, but you need to be able to manage a self-awareness correctly so it isn't self-destructive. Because if you're self-aware, you are seeing evil in yourself, then there's a slight desire to destroy yourself in a way. So you have to, I think as I grow and develop and understand what it is, what my faith is, I need to understand that it's not trying to kill me, and also you don't.
Well, see, that's where you would go, wouldn't you? If there wasn't, I mean, I'm a Christian, and without that hope of redemption, I might contemplate killing myself because I know if a Christopher Hitchens or somebody here would say, don't give up so easily. But but where do you look for that? Well, you don't find hope. There is no hope. You have to manufacture it. I mean, I've even had Dawkins more or less admit that to me privately. Nietzsche, guys like that who tell you that there's no meaning, their meaning is found in going around and selling books and telling other people that there is no meaning. I mean, even they have to manufacture it, but they manufacture it artificially, hypocritically.
Yeah, don't worship God, well, worship me.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're about. But you've had, and maybe this is too personal, but you've had kind of your own spiritual epiphany, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. I have. And also I don't feel that I was at the wheel. I think I was just ready to be at the wheel. However I've ended up in this place, in this area, in this place right now is unimaginable to me in just 5 years.
Did you feel like you had to hit bottom?
No, because I don't think I really, in a way, I don't think I have hit bottom in a lot of ways. In my backdoor ways, the ways of that leave open a chance for me to run away. I think I haven't quite got there, but I certainly hit the end of lies. And the end of meaning, and the end of, when I think about show business now, I think I've been so profoundly moved by films, and I've seen films that have, like, I remember leaving Good Will Hunting, or no, what's the one where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and Matt Damon's a maths genius.
Yeah, that's Good Will Hunting.
Good Will Hunting, and he. And I remember seeing that in New York and leaving the cinema and just feeling like a different person. I was just like, this is amazing. Oh, it's beautiful. And now I look at it and I'm like, it's not the same. It's in celebration of something so different. And I wonder if that's because of the changing times or whether I'm more sensitive to it. But I certainly got to the point where I thought, this has nothing left to give me.
Yeah.
and I want to give it something, but it has nothing left to give me. So I can't lie anymore. That's, I've got enough. I'm a deceitful enough person to not have to spend my professional life being deceitful, as well as some of my private life. So I'm trying to be open. What I'm in the process of doing is trying to be open about my own deceitfulness. That's really what I'm trying to do. I did an interview with a guy the other day. It was quite funny. And I said, he's quite a hard interviewer. And I said, I want you to give me a really hard time, because it's good. It's good intellectual exercise to be pushed around and put in difficult positions. And he said to me, I really tried to find some stuff to be hard on you with, but you've admitted it all. So I couldn't find stuff where which you were still defending so he tried me on one of these issues, and he said, do you regret this? I went, no, not at all. He said, why not? And I watched the interview back last night, and I could see what he was trying to do. And I was just meeting him with honesty and acceptance of the fact that I'm a fallen, broken, deceitful person. And it's quite disarming to an interviewer who's trying to push you in that way. So I'm as you and I have spoken about, I'm an Iron Hesiadi type Christian. You won't be getting my baptism. Well, I've been baptized, but you won't be getting my confirmation covered on Instagram, or my early protestations on Instagram. I'm not.
So you won't be teaching something equivalent to the Jordan B. Peterson biblical series. You're not up for that. You're not going to be.
I like his biblical series in an intellectual way.
You're not going to be. You're not be going around Laurence Fox Wrestles with God book or anything like that.
No, I instead I am writing a book, and it's basically a confession, and then it's a confession drawing towards hope, and and a bit of a sort of memoir and a manifesto at the same time. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a minister in the U.S. I'll call him a ministry, not really officially that, but he has a ministry that generally focuses on men. And he made this statement to me that I thought was kind of funny, but at the same time true. He said, I can't deal with young men. He said, I can't deal with them. He said, I get them in their 40s and in their 50s when their careers have become not exactly what they thought they would be. The marriage is a little less fulfilling. The children aren't turning out quite the way they expected them to. And he says, and then they're ready to listen to me when they've kind of reached the end of themselves. But he says, in their 20s, he says they're still sure that they have the world by the tail and that they've got it all figured out. They know things you don't know, and they're going to be a smashing success in every area of their life. And he said that he's particularly successful with men who are wildly successful in their careers, but have discovered that it's not as fulfilling as they thought it was going to be. That they've gotten there and they go, is this it? This is success?
There's nothing worse. That's the most lonely feeling you can ever have.
And you've been there.
I've definitely been there. I've definitely been to that thing of just going, I never wanted to be. Well, I think that's not true. At the beginning of my acting career, I wanted to be a big star, like my dad, probably to, as a sort of competition to my dad. I was like, I'm going to be a big star. And then after a while, I realized it made me so unhappy, the pursuit of being a big star. And I got so angry if I didn't get a meeting for this or a meeting for that. And I would be like, it's all my agent's fault. My agent's dreadful, and that's why. And I would blame everybody else. I wouldn't blame the fact that I probably hadn't done as much work as I should have done on the script preparation or stuff like that. And then I thought to myself, what? I don't want to be a star. I just want to work with great people. And I did that for a very long time. And then it changed. And then I just thought, I don't want to. It's strange. I really miss acting because I think I'm good at it. So I miss that.
I think you are too.
I miss that part of it.
And your dad thinks you were very good with a very limited character.
Oh, he's very kind. Yeah, well, this is the problem. The character doesn't have many lines.
I frankly thought that the character wasn't that limited, but what do I know? But it was funny. I'm joking.
Well, yeah,
because we had dinner the other night, and our parents are our parents. They never cease to be our parents.
No.
If your dad's alive, when when you're 60, he's still going to be your dad, and there's you're going to have to remind you of that fact along the way. But do you think you would have been ready for the kind of spiritual transformation that you have undergone and are currently undergoing? I sense that there's a lot happening with you privately when you were 25.
No, when I was 25, I was a drug addict.
Yeah.
I was a drug addict from, I had a little break, I had probably a 2-year break, but I was I was getting worse and worse and worse until I was 35, 36, I think, is when I stopped taking drugs. And I haven't gone back to them, and I wouldn't.
But you kind of had to reach the end of yourself.
Yeah, well, actually, it took the end of a marriage. So, and that's when I just walked, when that finished, I just walked out and I said, I ain't doing any of that anymore. That is, if you want to add real evil to a relationship, put cocaine in it. And you can really show that stuff is I can't even, I don't like being around. I can smell it when people have done it. I can see it in their eyes. I can hear it from a single tone in their voice. And, that's not me on any way saying I'm not full of the most egregious vices, but that particular cocaine is a dreadful, dreadful drug, and it did more damage to me that I'm still mending, actually.
I had this thought after a similar conversation, and it goes something like this, but it dawned on me that there will not be a single, there won't be a sin represented in hell that isn't also represented in heaven, save one, and that's self-righteousness. Meaning there will be murderers in heaven, there will be thieves in heaven, there will be blackmailers, and you name it, drug addicts, you name it, and also in hell. But there will be no self-righteous people in heaven, and that is because the self-righteous man will never ask forgiveness because he doesn't think he needs it, and he will never grant it because he's sure you don't deserve it.
Yeah,
and it's those individuals who will never yield themselves to God's redeeming power. They never will. And those are the truly evil people.
Yeah.
And I think it's Solzhenitsyn who said that for someone to do what is, the really extraordinarily evil stuff that we've seen in history, a person must first believe that what he's doing is right. He has to be full of his own self-righteousness, and which figures like Stalin and Hitler and, the Klaus Schwabs of the world certainly are. Fauci. I mean, did you see any of his testimony?
I just wrote Satan at the top of it.
The lack of any humility in his testimony was incredible to me, that we're all these years, after the fact, and you would think that he would be saying, mistakes were made, at least to say that.
Yeah.
Acknowledge nothing.
No.
There wasn't even a bit of humility. And I thought that's a picture of real evil right there.
I struggle with my feelings about Anthony Fauci and the London mayor and people like that. What I think I've learned, actually, out of all of the things that I've learned most recently, is that you don't, and I think the Christians kind of sell this really badly. Certainly in the UK they do, that you have to kind of be this wonderful, perfect person before you can even begin to have a conversation with God. But actually, no, it's almost the other way around. You have to be ready, and you can be as broken as anything, and you still have exactly the same conversation, which is why you're saying, murderers can go to heaven and all this sort of stuff, as long as they've repented. And I think that's probably why we're seeing a huge rise and upsurge in Christianity. Certainly in England, I was with a friend yesterday you met who has a church, and they said it's hundreds and hundreds more every month are coming, young people, because they're realizing, they're seeing what the opposite is, and they're
experiencing evil. That to me is interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot, how right now people are butting up against and witnessing this. It's kind of what I was trying to say about Geneva when I was just in Geneva, and these are mostly secularly minded people. So it's their culture, it's what they've grown up in, and it's what they know. But they're asking a spiritual question at a policy
level
convention,
yeah.
And they're saying, "Wow, we are seeing real evil," and the experience of that evil has caused them to rethink that maybe its opposite must also be real too, and it's caused some of them, like in, as they would say, the Dutch. They corrected me. I said, "Do you know who Ayaan Hirsi Ali?" Who? Ayaan Hirsi Ali? Oh, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Do you know? Yeah, this caused people like her. I don't want to mischaracterize her own conversion. She's recently converted to Christianity, and I think authentic Christianity with great humility. But listening to her, I get the impression that it has been the experience of evil that has caused her to reevaluate her atheistic commitments and go, no, this isn't true. Its opposite must be true. There must be a real God, a true God. And she found that God in the pages of the Bible, in Christianity, and that she's converted. And one of the most powerful moments when we were in church together for me was when the pastor, who wasn't the regular pastor, if you recall, he was like an assistant pastor, happened to be preaching that day, kind of a very Southern, what we would say, kind of a country accent, a very folksy message, but he would back it all up with, as the Bible says, and he would put these passages up on a big screen. But he asked people, how many of you here have had your lives changed by Jesus Christ, who were, say, drug addicts, failed marriages, and a hand started going up all over the place. And I thought that's so powerful, because at the same time in Birmingham, there would be a number of other churches that would be preaching a social gospel, not from the pages of the Bible. And everyone sitting out there, they are full of their own self-righteousness. And if a question like that would be asked of them, not a hand would go up. And that's the difference, I think, from the real, humble, redeeming work of Jesus Christ versus that which is about being seeing and being seen.
Yeah,
there's a real big difference there, and I think that we have to, before we can start even having the conversation about changing, transforming society, we have to start with ourselves.
Yeah,
and in the understanding of the limits of our own goodness and the need for some input from the outside in order to change us, and therefore, change any society that we're a part of.
And that's the message. It's a simple message.
And your car, I think, will get towed very shortly.
It is getting towed very shortly.
If we don't end this.
Yeah, it is.
This will probably be
the last time I drive.
Well, I don't know how often we'll have the opportunity to sit in the same room.
We're going to start
together.
A show.
But we're doing this show, and we're going to
do a
call
show.
it
WTF. Which doesn't sound for what the fuck. It means the world according to Taunton and Fox. It will be coming to you soon. And rather than us doing this, which is just you getting to know Larry a bit better and him and us talking, it's going to be the world according to Taunton and Fox. So we look forward to sharing it with you.
And by the way, I have to throw this. You know who I'm about to see?
Who?
In just a couple of days.
Who?
The guy who normally sits in that chair.
Calvin in Alabama.
It's so funny. I'm here in London. He's in Alabama right now, and he's going to come and see me in just a couple of days. So
is he going to stay over?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what his plan. He's welcome if he wants to.
Get him to stay over. He'd love nothing more than the evening on that dock, the morning on the porch.
I get the impression he's going from meeting to meeting to meeting.
Yeah, but
he didn't even know really about me until
he should stop. I think that's one of the things. I love you, Calv, with all my heart, but he does need to. He doesn't do much looking after himself. He does a lot of looking after other people. So a day of just being sat.
He's welcome
on a porch and then on a dock.
I would enjoy that very much, getting to know him.
So we're going to bring you guys a show, and I love you, Larry. Thank you, and it's been a great honour of my year to make you as a friend. and someone to guide and help me.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Amen. Cheers, guys.